All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Happy Thursday. It is May the 25th, and boy, do we got a good one for you tonight. We are live streaming exclusively on Rumble right now. We have been removed from live streaming on Facebook. Our Facebook page that has reached over 1.2 million in the last month alone, with barely 15,000 followers. We've gotten stricken from our live streams. Imagine that. So we're here on Rumble. We're happy to be here, and we're talking Trudeau clears himself, because of course he does, on the Chinese collusion. And with that in mind, we're going to kind of end the episode with a question answer about who can have him investigated. Because ironically enough, there is a position in Canadian government that does stand over the Prime Minister. And that person, whoever fills that role, can and is likely the only person who ever could actually have any kind of action that would hold any feet to fire, have any liability or accountability, anything like that. So a special rapporteur, David Johnston, as Pierre Poilievre likes to call him, his old cottage buddy, right? Trudeau appoints a family friend, his cottage buddy, as a special rapporteur, which is a nonsensical term for controlled opposition. I don't know what else you want to call it. And he is now meant to decide whether or not there's enough evidence to suggest whether or not there should be an investigation even take place. And we all held our breath because we were all so curious to find out. And here we are, we have our answer. David Johnston says no to a public inquiry. And you'll see his reasons. And I have my own thoughts on his reasons. And that's going to lead us to the latter part of the episode. Who can have him investigated? Who can hold a prime minister's feet to fire? And the answer might surprise you. Some of you might know, and the Rumble comment section is probably going to let me know, because I know there are a few of you that know that. Check it in here now. Excellent. All right. So let's get down to it. Firstly, before we get into who can do all this, let's talk David Johnston. Let's have a look at this. Johnston says no to a public inquiry on foreign interference. This is from the cbc.ca. The links are already in the Rumble chat for you guys there. And look at that face. That's all I can say about that. They couldn't have picked a better picture. He says foreign interference is a real and growing threat, and that more needs to be done. But the former Governor General says that while a public process is required, a separate formal public inquiry isn't the way forward. These comments down here, by the way, are absolutely amazing. I suggest anybody, after the show, go have a look at that. So he's recommending against the public inquiry. And Trudeau says, of course, color me shocked that the government will follow that recommendation. So again, he's asked his old cottage buddy to investigate him, and his cottage buddy has decided there's no need for an investigation. Don't worry about it. Couple of softball quotes from him, because again, you have to understand we are looking at the cbc.ca here. So it's not going to be anything hardball, especially given it's being easy on Trudeau. That he thought when he began the process, and while that would have been an easy choice, it's not the correct one, quote unquote. So he says that he goes on to say that it has a lot to do with what would come to light if there was a public inquiry. And that's really bad. He claims he found no ethical fault with the way the federal government handled foreign interference. That's absolutely laughable. If you follow us at all, you know that we have covered CSIS and their agents testifying in Parliament that every government since Brian Mulroney, which is the 90s, which dates me. Every government since Mulroney has been corrupted by China. And every government has been briefed by CSIS along the way. And every government chose to ignore it. Apparently, he found no ethical fault with the way that he handled it. And apparently, he finds the narrative is not fair based on the facts that he found. He's asked the NSIRA, which is the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency, an independent government agency. That's an oxymoron. I want you guys to check that out right there. You got to watch this. When the cathedral media really wants to pump a narrative, they just put absolute and utter nonsense in front of you. So he asked the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency, which is an independent government agency, and the Committee of Parliamentarians, which is a joint parliamentary committee, to review his conclusions. So his conclusions are that the governments are attempting, there are foreign governments attempting to do all this that CSIS is alleging has been happening since the 90s. That much of the media's reporting raised legitimate questions, but that it didn't have full context. And apparently that means it was misconstrued by journalists. At least they're not blaming us for misinformation this time. He's blaming the mainstream cathedral media for it now, the legacy media, and that there are serious shortcomings in home security, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so the final conclusion is this: government won't call an inquiry into Justin Trudeau. And of course, as we just said earlier, Trudeau says that the government will follow the recommendations and will not call a public inquiry, despite pressure from the opposition parties. And you notice that's plural. That's important because that's going to bring us to the next article we're going to look at on the topic. Opposition parties. You remember, the Liberals are being propped up right now. They don't have a majority government. They have the NDP sitting on their lap pretending to have a red shirt on while they've got a yellow shirt on underneath, right? They're propping them up from a minority to majority status. So if it's the opposition parties, plural, that are upset about this, if the NDP is one of those parties, this could be trouble for Justin. We'll see. So this article, we're basically done now, this specific one. And the next thing I want to look at, the link for that's in the comments, by the way, on Rumble. So if you want to check these out yourself, everything we're looking at tonight will be in the comment section. That one's there now. Now, the very next one is Poilievre is calling on Singh to force a foreign interference inquiry. Again, CBC. So we're gonna spot the cathedral media's collusions along the way of their own. So here we have, and again, remember the pictures they chose. David Johnston, they had him looking down and all sad and oh my goodness. And now they have Pierre Poilievre with his right hand extended up in the air. Now it's not flat, but still. And he's got a very stern look on his face. He may as well have a mustache. This is how CBC will paint him. And this is the left and right false paradigm that they're going to play for this new election now, Pierre versus Justin kind of thing. So the Conservative Party leader, he was talking in Gatineau, and he said that Jagmeet Singh is holding back because he is right about that. I don't give Pierre any credit ever, but he is right on that for sure. It is Jagmeet Singh and the NDP that are propping up the Liberals in the House of Commons. So if Jagmeet Singh thinks that there should be some sort of inquiry, he has all the power. It is up to him. All he has to do is say yes, and there we go. So in true conservative opportunistic form, Pierre is now going to call on Jagmeet Singh to kind of do some things in the House of Commons to force this, or maybe just do it publicly and force Trudeau. Now, you got to remember, David Johnston, this special rapporteur, and I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but I don't care. He is a former governor general, and that's important because the latter part of this episode, again, remember, is titled "Who Can Have Him Investigated?" So remember that. David Johnston is a former governor general. In fact, he was governor general until Mary Simon, which would have been off the top of my head 2016 or 17, which means when Trudeau was around. Now, this is important here. He's saying no to this public inquiry, and he's citing the sensitive nature of the intelligence an inquiry would have to examine. I want Canadians specifically to hear this, but Americans, it applies to you guys too. And I mean, any Western country, really. The guy who got to look into all the evidence to decide whether or not there should be an inquiry has said no because of the sensitive nature of the intelligence that the inquiry would have to examine. That tells you that there is a need for the inquiry right there. Again, this is how the mainstream media does it. This paragraph right here is the spell they're casting right now. But the highlighted paragraph here starts with former Governor General David Johnston. And from there, it's spellcraft. I don't know. They're putting it right in front of your face. They're telling you there's a need for it by telling you there's not a need for it. I don't know how else to put that. Saying no, do not move forward with a public inquiry because of the sensitive nature of the intelligence that the inquiry would have to examine. There you go. And here's a picture of Pierre. That's a Freudian slip if I've ever heard one. That's a video snippet, and there's the picture of Pierre in Gatineau calling on Jagmeet Singh to put pressure on and force and yada, yada, yada. So, this is a quote now from Pierre, is Jagmeet Singh going to stay in his coalition with Justin Trudeau and help him cover up his latest scandal? Again, we're in election season, so opportunistic conservatives are going to hammer this kind of stuff. Latest scandal. It's not to cover up this scandal. It's to cover up this latest scandal because they have to hammer home the amount of ethics violations and scandals along the way that Mr. Rainbows and Unicorns has had to face. And you got to love the way he ends this. Is Singh going to help Trudeau cover up the interference of a hostile foreign dictatorship in our elections? Now, the last part of the stream is called "Who Can Have Him Investigated?" And that is a very interesting. We got somebody here. If people can't see that they're fraud, there's no hope for them. Vote with your dollar and be civilly disobedient. That's fantastic. Absolutely. 100%. Couldn't agree more. Got silver. You might enjoy this next part, actually, then. So, who can have him investigated? Some people have made the claim that the Sergeant of Arms, remember when there was that shooting on Parliament Hill and that heroic old man in uniform, Vickers, Kevin Vickers, I think it was, saved the day on Parliament Hill when that crazy guy went in shooting. You remember that? A lot of people seem to think that that person or yeah, I love that. I'm just seeing a comment here from somebody on Rumble about etymology of this stuff. Yes, you're 100% correct. I can't display your comment on screen because it's in the Rumble side and we don't have that link. But yeah, I'll read that out in a minute. So who can have him investigated? It's not the Sergeant of Arms. I can promise you that. This will take a couple of minutes. And if you're Canadian specifically, guys, you really should be looking at this. This is something that really does pertain to you. This is the Constitution Act of Canada. If you're unfamiliar with this and you're Canadian, it doesn't surprise me, but still, you need to familiarize yourself with it. A lot of people seem to think that Canada is a democracy because they go and vote and they think that means we're a democracy. Not even close. We're a Westminster parliamentary subsidiary of the UK is the best way to put it. Now, we have governing documents for our parliament. It is the Constitution Acts 1867 to 1982 that you see on screen, which is the old BNA Act, the British North America Act, which was just simply transcribed into Canadian English rather than British English, LOL, and made our Constitution Act. And that is what governs Parliament. The other part of our Constitution, quote unquote, which is a Constitution Act, which is an act of Parliament, is the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which every Canadian seems to know about. But that's just an amendment to what is our Constitution Act here in Canada. The original and majority of the Constitution is here. The Constitution Acts 1867 to 1982. There's a ton of stuff. This link is in the comments as well on Rumble, by the way. Harry, how you doing, Harry? Unreal. Well, look at this, Harry. You'll enjoy this one. So this is the forward, the layout of our, and the French version, all this stuff. As you're scrolling, you're noticing that there's nothing, this is all introductory. We're only on the third, fourth page. As you get down to here, general, and as you get to 6 and 7, 6 is the first of it. Table of provisions. You have the Constitution Acts, and now I'm going to zoom in more so that people can really see this. You have the table of provisions, and this is all the parts of the Constitution, or the Constitution Act, I should say, just to make sure we're clear. You have the Declaration of the Union. You have the provisions of all the provinces, the first ones to join. You have a section here that we're coming back to in a second. But just so you see, you have legislative power, how the Constitution of Parliament works, privileges, the first sessions, the Senate. It breaks down the provincial constitutions, the powers that are separated, the jurisdiction of Canadian Parliament versus her provinces and the provincial parliaments, everything. And I'm just scrolling through here to show you this little glossary, to show you that this is the entirety of it. Now, if you come back up to page 6 again, and you come to section 9 here, you see executive power. This is where it gets interesting. And Harry, you're talking about etymology of words, and yeah, we're a corporation, stock by trade. Yeah, you're absolutely right, 100%. I love the etymology here in the comment section, and we actually did a video where we show Canada's corporate registry on the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. Anyways. Executive power. You're into etymology. You know what executive means, and executive authority and executive power, right? So, and this is great. This is a PDF, so they're clickable links. So you click number 9, executive power. The first thing I want to read out to you guys here is this. The executive government and authority of and over Canada is hereby declared to continue and be vested in the Queen. I want to remind you guys, just because you see 1867 as a date on here, this document was rewritten and then reaffirmed in 1982 with the Charter of Rights. The Charter of Rights came in at the same time as this document was rewritten to be Canadian English and merged with the Charter of Rights to be our Constitution Act of Parliament. So there's no argument to be made that this is somehow outdated, old, whatever. This is the current governing documents, okay? And this is not the only section we're looking at. This is the first thing I want to draw your attention to. The executive government and authority of and over Canada is hereby declared to continue and be vested in the Queen. Okay, now when we talk about Governor Generals, this is why I wanted to talk about David Johnston being a former Governor General, because if you've been a part of, excuse me, if you're a part of the Queen's Privy Council, therefore eligible to be named to be Governor General by the Queen on the advice of the Prime Minister, you know this. You are very privy to the information that is in the governing documents. So, the provisions of this act referring to Governor General extend and apply to the Governor General for the time being of Canada or the other Chief Executive Officer. Guys, remember, we're a corporation, right, Harry? What kind of structure has a Chief Executive Officer, a CEO, and administrators? For the time being, yada, 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 of Canada, on behalf and in the name of the Queen, again, by whatever title he is designated. The Queen is the person who appoints the Governor General, and the CEO, the sitting CEO, the Prime Minister, does the formal appointing or the public appointing. And we're not done. Keep scrolling. We're still in, remember guys, we're still in the section that's called Executive Power. And if you need to open up a new browser or a new window there, a new tab, and go to Google and figure out what the definition of executive power means, and then read number 9 here, and then 10, of course. And we still haven't gotten to the best part. But Section 11 is Constitution of the Privy Council for Canada. The Privy Council is the secret group of special boys and girls that the Queen has that works as her board of directors to operate the corporation known as Canada. There shall be a council to aid and advise in the government of Canada, to be styled the Queen's Privy Council of Canada, and the persons who are to be members of that council shall be, from time to time, chosen and summoned by the Governor General and sworn in as Privy Councillors, and members thereof may be from time to time removed by the Governor General. The Governor General has executive authority, right? And just in case, this is where we get to the juicy part. Harry, I want you to pay attention to the words as we read this. Section 12. So the link is in the comments. It is the laws-loi.justice.gc.ca. It's that link there. If you want to read along or if you want to look at it afterwards. Section 12. The title of the section: all powers under acts to be exercised by Governor General with advice of Privy Council or alone. Now, the Privy Council is the group of people that the Governor General appoints. So it's basically alone anyways, but and if you're familiar with legalese, the comma or alone, so it's inclusive. Now, Harry and anyone else who may be reading, this entire section, look how long it is. Look at me scrolling, okay? And we'll read it out, is one sentence. There is not one period, not one full stop in this entire mumble of words. All powers, authorities, and functions which under any act of Parliament of Great Britain or of the Parliament of United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland or of the Legislature of Upper Canada, Lower Canada, Canada, Nova Scotia, or New Brunswick are at the Union vested in or exercisable by the respective governors or lieutenant governors of those provinces with the advice and consent of respective executive councils thereof, which is the privy councils that they select, or in conjunction with those councils, comma, or with any number of members thereof. They don't even have to consult all the members of them. They can pick the ones they want. or by the governors or lieutenant governors individually, meaning by themselves, shall, as far as the same, continue in existence and capable of being exercised after the Union in relationship to the government of Canada, comma, be vested in and exercisable by the Governor General, with the advice and consent of, or in conjunction with the Queen's Privy Council for Canada, the people the Governor General appoint, or any members thereof, or by the Governor General individually, comma, as the case requires, subject nevertheless, with respect to such as exists under Acts of Parliament of Great Britain or of the Parliament of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, to be abolished or altered by the Parliament of Canada. Now that was quite the mouthful. That was yeah. Go back and read that. You want to talk about word salad? People like to make fun of Trudeau for the word salad. I challenge people to read Section 12 of the Constitution Act of Canada under executive authority, and it takes a lot to break down. It's plain English, but it's also legalese. And if you know, you know, and if you don't, you don't. And I'm looking at Rumble comments here now. No act applies just to corporation. Yes. It's a legal fiction. It's fraud. Absolutely. Here's one to consider as well. Charter. Okay. We already talked about in this section here, it talks about a chief executive officer, correct? Right here, section 10, or the chief executive officer, because we're talking about the Corporation of Canada, the executive branch of the government. So the chief executive officer, we have a charter in Canada, the Charter of Rights. What do you do? Do you charter people? When you charter people, you take them on a vacation somewhere. But I've never seen a charter apply to people in a practical sense. A charter is actually legally defined as a piece of legislation that creates a corporation and sets up the structure of that corporation. Now, that would be an interesting look to start reading your Charter of Rights. Specifically, we're not looking at it tonight. We might look at it down the road. But if you're watching now and you're interested, Section 15, Section 22, Section 32, Section 58, and Section 59, just off the top of my head. I'll repeat those again: 15, 22, 32, 58, and 59. Keeping in mind that Canada is a corporation, keeping in mind that we're registered on the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. We have our own corporate identifier number. You know how corporations file financial taxes at the end of the year, and it's the end of the fiscal year, which is ironically the same time that we file our taxes and the government does all their taxes. Do you know that what we consider to be budgets and financial statements passed through legislation here in Canada, that's what we understand it as, but it's registered as as the corporate's financial filings, and you can read them. They're open public knowledge. All you need to do is find it on the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. Anyways, now that you know about that, and you know that we have a chief executive officer and we're ran as a corporation in Canada, maybe it's time to start looking at your Charter of Rights, the next part of this document, and see what it has to say. Because a lot of people like to look at their Bill of Rights, their Charter of Rights, and to dissolve the corporation. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, again, I can't display the Rumble comments. We're going to figure out a way to do that for next stream. A lot of people think the Bill of Rights, a lot of people think the Charter of Rights are going to somehow provide them some sort of security against government tyranny. These are documents for the corporation. They don't even apply to you. Literally, section 32 of the Charter is called the application section. Go find out who it applies to, who and what it applies to. And you'll find out why the Charter of Rights needed to be made, because there was a Bill of Rights. Why did we need a Charter of Rights if there was already a Bill of Rights? Well, if you read the very last section of the Bill of Rights, it tells you it only applies to federal parliament. So the jurisdiction that requires provincial parliament, the Bill of Rights wouldn't cover, would be moot. And in modern times, think about that. Most of the COVID legislation that came down was provincial. There was obviously federal mandates, but most of the stuff that affected you day to day was your provincial regulations, because healthcare is a provincial jurisdiction given to you by the Constitution Act 1867 that we just looked at. So that's why the Bill of Rights is moot. It makes it only covers federal parliament, and it had to be superseded legally, quote unquote, with the Charter of Rights. And again, what is a charter? Google it. The legal definition of a charter is simply a piece of legislation that creates a corporation and sets up the structure thereof. And that's almost verbatim. So maybe it's time for Canadians to start looking at this stuff. And a couple of people trickled in. We're basically at what I would consider to be the final of tonight. I don't have a whole lot more to say. We already covered the Pierre Poilievre stuff. Guys, just look at this. This is the governing documents for Canada, okay? This is the Canadian Constitution Act. The links are in the comments here in Rumble. You come down past the forward, you come down past the French nonsense, you come over here to the amendments and keep going past all that, and you get down to the introduction, the table of provisions. And it shows all the stuff, the provinces. If you keep going past executive power like I did earlier, you'll see that it sets out what is a provincial jurisdiction versus what is federal. And that's where it states that healthcare is provincial. That's why your COVID regulations came to you in the form of provincial regulations. And executive power, number 9, is where we're looking at. The executive government and authority of and over Canada is hereby declared to continue and be vested in the Queen. This comes from 1982, guys. This is not ancient. This is not outdated. I wish I could say it was, but this is the current documents that govern Canadian Parliament. The executive government and authority of and over Canada is hereby declared to continue and be vested in the Queen, which will now be King, because this stuff happens in perpetuity, and that's also included in the wording, not in executive authority. But there is provisions in all Commonwealth governing documents about the perpetuity of the crown. It's not the person sitting on the crown that matters. The Queen, actually, in the definition, the Queen is the crown, quote unquote, which is an office, again, another corporation. So when they say the Queen, they're actually referring to the crown. Anyways, we have a chief executive officer here in Canada, which might shock some Canadians, might even shock some Americans, I don't know. But we have a chief executive officer, and that's because we're a corporation. And we're registered on the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. So that's not a question. That's not, a deep Reddit rabbit hole conspiracy. And we'll do an episode on it if it's warranted. Maybe we'll do the United States Securities Exchange Commission and the Charter of Rights as another episode. But for now, guys, we have a chief executive officer, a CEO, a corporation, and we have administration. So Section 12 is the big one, and I'm not reading it again. I don't want to piss off the people that are watching. I want to thank the people that are watching. This has been fantastic for us. This is the first time we're streaming exclusively to Rumble because we have been banned from Facebook and from YouTube. So right now, our page that's reaching 1.2 million people a month is currently banned from going live because we're telling too many truths, obviously. So we can still post stuff, but we're not allowed to go live. So what we're doing is we're using this opportunity to take full advantage of Rumble. This platform is fantastic. There's no censorship. There's none of that nonsense. And yeah, so that's that, guys. We've looked at what we wanted to look at for tonight. We looked at Trudeau clearing himself using David Johnston, his former cottage buddy, as Pierre Poilievre likes to put it. And now we're looking at, or we just looked at, who can have him investigated. The only person that stands above the Prime Minister in Canada is the Governor General. And believe it or not, the lieutenant governors of the provinces would technically stand above the Prime Minister. And I'm not saying that just for Trudeau. That just applies. That's the governing documents right there in front of your face. So that's that. That's a wrap, guys. Thank you for listening. Make sure to subscribe to us if you're not already. If you don't have an account, it takes minutes to get an account on Rumble. You should all have an account on Rumble if you don't have one already. Give us a follow and like the video, share it out. Thanks for listening, guys. Thanks for participating in the comments. And it's been fantastic. You people, you stay sovereign.